Inference Plus Story Short Number 34, Series B. 546. Jenny pulled the nightshirt off and stepped immediately into the hot stream of the shower head. As long as she didn't catch sight of herself in the bathroom mirror, she could continue living with the pleasant delusion that not so much had changed in the 34 years since she'd been 16, and that was fine. As her dad would have said, aging sucks, but it sure beats the alternative. She began washing at her armpits, working her way down from there. She closed her eyes and held her breath and let the water beat down on her head. It was as she used her hands to squeegee off the last traces of soap that she felt the lump. She stepped out of the stream of water, eyes popping open as her fingers worked the egg-sized fleshy lump on her torso. It was just below her left breast, more towards her side than her abdomen. She assessed it, heart pounding. Size, like a large chicken egg. Shape, ovalish, roundish, smooth edges. Texture, squishy, firm, bounced back when she pressed on it. Pain? No. How long had it been there? Apparently a while. Cancer? Probably. Death? Also probably. She shut off the shower, dried off, went into the walk-in closet, closed the door, and collapsed into the chair she sat in to put on her shoes. Jenny twisted her body, trying to get a better look at the lump. It was visible now that she knew to look for it, a little bulge that had managed to hide itself between two rolls of flesh. That was probably why she hadn't noticed it before. Middle-age spread. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. She would call her doctor, get a mammogram. That's what you were supposed to do. She would call in sick to work, screw the assistant principal. She'd banked up 37 sick days. If cancer didn't qualify as sick, she didn't know what did. 5:51. She sat there, naked and soggy, and thought through the chemo and the radiation and the hair loss and the vomiting. The librarian at school had breast cancer a few years ago. She looked like hell for a year, but was now running 5Ks on the weekends. No reason she wouldn't do just as well. She cried. 5:54. Jenny felt the panic rising. She thought about waking Andy, whose maddening snores continued in fits and starts. She remembered the Xanax Kelly gave her last week at girls' night. You never know when you'll need to calm down in a hurry. Just take it. And thank Jesus and all the saints that she hadn't been too much of a goody-goody to accept it. She pulled out the bin of assorted handbags and rummaged until she found the little red clutch she'd taken out to Comidas Frescas. The two yellow rectangles of Xanax were still tucked inside the credit card slot. She settled on half a pill, which she swallowed dry. The bitter aftertaste, which she normally hated, was welcome today. It reminded her that relief for this awful, heart-pounding feeling was coming. 6 o'clock. Jenny pulled on a baggy t-shirt dress that she normally only wore as a pool cover-up. No bra. Screw the bra. If she was dying, she wasn't going to wear a bra while she did it. It would take the Xanax a while to kick in. She'd drive to Dr. Melton's office, Kathy, and take the other half of the Xanax, then wait in the parking lot until the office opened at 8. 6:03. Andy was still snoring, his infuriating snore as she slipped out into the hallway. She left the dogs kenneled. Andy could feed them and let them out when his alarm went off at 7. As she settled into the driver's seat, she quickly assessed where she was at with the Xanax. Heart pounding in her ears, thoughts racing, a sheen of nervous sweat. Nope, not drug impaired, not yet. Kathy's office was only 10 minutes away. 6:11. She made excellent time. As predicted, no traffic this early. Jenny pulled into the parking space at the front of the lot outside Doctor's Building Number 2. She shut off the engine, but left the radio on. It might kill the battery, but who cared? She popped another half Xanax into her mouth, this time washing down the bitterness at the back of her tongue with the watery remains of yesterday's Diet Coke. Her hand prodded endlessly at the lump now, an urge that was pointless to fight. Jenny reclined the seat all the way back. The radio was set to the oldies station, and she only felt the slightest pang of misery when Nirvana's Smells Like Teen Spirit began to play. The drum of her heartbeat slowed and faded from her ears, and she began to feel floaty. Thank God, it was finally kicking in. She closed her eyes and let the world slide away. 8:09. Pounding. Jenny? Jenny, can you hear me? Are you having a medical emergency? Jenny's eyes opened lazily. Her mouth tasted like the inside of a gym shoe, and her head was pounding. Kathy's open palms slapped urgently against the driver's side window. Jenny flipped the lever and sat the seat upright. Oh, thank God. Jenny rolled down the window. Kathy, how'd you know it was me? Kathy rolled her eyes. Andy posted about a dozen photos of this car when he bought it for you guys last month. What the hell are you doing out here? Are you pregnant? Jenny stared at her blankly. It happens more often than you'd think, Kathy said. Perimenopause. Jenny felt tears begin to come. I wish it was that. I think I've got a tumor. Breast cancer. Kathy's shift into doctor mode was visible. Okay, let's not put the cart before the horse, okay? Let's go up to the office and I'll have a look, okay? Okay. A sniffle. 8:14. In the office, Kathy brushed past the receptionist, pushed my first appointment by 15, please, and guided Jenny into exam room number 4, the one with the good window that overlooked the park instead of the highway. Let's see it. Right there. Kathy palpated the lump. Smooth borders, little warm to the touch. Any pain? Jenny shook her head. Firm, but has some pliability. Pretty good size. When did you say you first noticed it? This morning. In the shower? Nothing before that? Seems like it's a pretty good size, like you'd have noticed it growing. Jenny shook her head. The first I ever felt was this morning. I don't see evidence of an insect bite. Have you changed laundry detergents? No. Bumped into something. Maybe you forgot? No. Kathy exhaled. Okay then, let's sit you up. Is it cancer? Now, without a biopsy, I can't say with 100% certainty, but I don't think it's cancer. So what is it then? Kathy shrugged. Probably a cyst, maybe a lipoma, but it's not actually on your breast. It's quite a way down on your torso, and torso cancer isn't really a thing. It showed up suddenly, the borders are smooth, the growth itself is pliable. A little feverish, but that's just your skin saying, whoa, don't stretch me out so fast. All that makes me think it's not cancer. But you can't be sure without a biopsy. That's right, but I really, truly don't think you need to be worried. I'm going to refer you to a specialist to get one done, which will take a few days to schedule. If I thought it was cancer, I'd get you in today. Jenny nodded. Kathy continued. My money's on a cyst, probably fluid-filled. Betcha it sprays like Old Faithful when they aspirate it. What caused it? Hell if I know, human bodies are gross. Middle age makes them even more gross. My point here is that most of the time, stuff will scare the crap out of you, but turn out to be nothing. You were right to come in, though. Better to err on the side of paranoia, but I really don't think you need to worry. Now, I better go do the checkup on that pregnant lady waiting in the lobby before she goes into a fit of hormonal rage. You gonna be okay? Kind of a big morning. I am, thank you. No problem, and I'll call you in the next day or so with the referral info. 9:02. Back in the driver's seat of her SUV, Jenny cried. She hadn't known that relief could feel even better than joy. She might be happier in this moment than the first time Kathy placed Carly in her arms for the first time. Not that she'd ever admit that to anyone. 9:26. Once the crying dried up, Jenny was faced with the pleasant realization that she had a completely free day ahead of her. Going into school now wouldn't do anything but annoy the sub, and Jenny would still have 36 banked sick days after this one. Andy would be at the office by now. She considered calling him and filling him in on the morning's drama, but decided not to. She told herself she was doing it to save him the worry, but if she were being completely honest, she didn't want him coming home and grilling her with 1,000 answerless questions on her surprise day off. She loved Andy, but his innate anxiety would drive her nuts. She wanted to celebrate being alive, not spend the next 9 hours being diagnosed by Dr. Google. A day on the sofa in the living room, binge-watching Bridgerton, without Andy coming in to tease her about her old-timey porn, as he insisted on calling it, sounded divine. And if she dozed off for 2 or 3 episodes, no harm in that. It was her 3rd time through, so she'd have no trouble picking up the plot when she woke up to pee. On the way home, she hit up the McDonald's drive-thru. She usually limited herself to a large Diet Coke, middle-aged spread and all that, but today she got herself a number 4. Somehow they were already serving lunch food, even though it wasn't 10 o'clock yet, with a real Coke, and sure, make it a large, why not? Today was her lucky day. When she reached across to the passenger seat to dig her debit card out of her purse, the lump rubbed uncomfortably against the seatbelt, giving her a quick jab of complaint. Ouch! At least the biopsy would drain the gunk out and get it out of the way. She paid for the food and took a long, deep swallow of the Coke. The Xanax made her mouth cottony, and the sugary soda provided a relief that the diet stuff couldn't match. She was going to have to get the real thing more often, she decided. As soon as she clicked the garage door opener button, she knew the dogs, big labs named Paul and Ringo, because Andy was obsessed with the Beatles, would already be tumbling over one another to see who could block the doorway first. She knew if she brought the McDonald's into the house, they'd sit there next to the table pitifully the entire time she ate. 3 years in, she realized she'd only really gotten the dogs because she was sad about her daughter leaving for college. She loved them, but today she would eat in the car in peace. Unfastening her seatbelt, Jenny once again brushed the clasp against the lump. Once again, it was uncomfortable. Sort of a pain combined with a bubbly sensation. It reminded her of those first little butterflies she felt when she was pregnant with Carly about 1,000,000 years ago, a thought that made her a little wistful and sad. She stopped herself. This was her day, and she wasn't ruining it moping around about being old and used up. It was probably the fluid inside the cyst. Kathy was right. It was going to spray like Old Faithful when they did that biopsy. She hoped the guy with the needle wore one of those face shields. She put Bridgerton on her phone, and it was still funny when Eloise yelled, "Daphne, make haste!" The quarter pounder was salty and greasy and utterly delicious. Jenny was ravenous, and she devoured every last morsel, even tipping back the fry container and giving it a shake into her mouth. The last time she'd eaten that much in one sitting had been years ago. She belched. No need for company manners, she mused, when you were slamming down fast food in your car. 9:58. Paul and Ringo were every bit as exuberant as she'd anticipated, probably more so because they could smell the lingering scent of forbidden people food. If she wanted any chance of watching her show in peace, she'd need to occupy them. Treat! Who wants a treat? This was one of the 6 or 7 words they knew well, and they bolted to the pantry to wait for whatever piece of overpriced animal refuse she deemed to give them. Himalayan yak cheeses would last all afternoon and probably into tomorrow. Sit. They sat more or less obediently. Sit was another word in their 6 or 7 word repertoire. Yak cheeses distributed, the dogs skittered off across the vinyl flooring and settled into their respective corners of the kitchen and commenced fervent gnawing. Finally, time to put on the good scenes. Jenny liked to watch TV lying down on the sofa, a habit that annoyed Andy even after 21 years. According to him, sofas were for sitting. But Andy wasn't here. After the morning she'd had, she was doing whatever she wanted. Clickers? Check. Good throw pillow? Check. Blanket? Check. Remaining tumbler of Coke? Check. Bump? A little hot and achy, but manageable. Reluctant check. Loud dog chewing from the next room. Big time check. For the first time since her unpleasant discovery in the shower, she felt herself truly relax. If today had taught her any moral lesson, it was that mortality, and the fear of it, was its own form of cancer. It was easy enough to let it consume you entirely. 11:44. Jenny shifted in her sleep. She'd been having a pretty racy dream about Reggie-Jean Page when a jab of pain in her side jolted her awake. Stupid lump. She had now begun to refer to it mentally as "Ol' Lumpy." When she put pressure on it when she turned over, that had seemed to have angered it. Or maybe him, because only a man would be a big enough jerk to ruin the first nap she'd had in a decade. She lifted the hem of her nightshirt and twisted it to have a better look. It was definitely larger than it had been in Kathy's office. Redder, too, and hotter. It looked like half a baseball was hiding under her skin, waiting for the batter to try for second. She struggled to sit up and figured she might as well pee as long as she was awake anyway. Standing up seemed to help Lumpy settle down again, and by the time she'd finished in the toilet, she wasn't noticing it so much anymore. Still, she decided a couple of ibuprofen wouldn't hurt, get ahead of the swelling, so she shook 4 tablets into her palm and took them back to the living room. She washed them down with the watery remains of the Coke. She settled back into the sofa. Season 3, Episode 4. That was a good one. This time, Jenny made sure she laid down on her right side. 3:03. 2 wet noses snuffled her face. She opened her eyes and wasn't surprised to see Paul's earnest expression in extreme close-up. He was the one they called an empath. Ringo, the more self-serving one, had abandoned her face and begun to explore the folds of blanket covering her left side. The pressure of the dog's nose set off a jab of discomfort. She swatted at the dog. "Ringo, no, knock it off." Reluctantly, he stopped. Both dogs retreated to the dog door Andy had installed and spilled out into the backyard in a fit of yaps. Squirrels, no doubt, always squirrels. At least they'd be busy for 20 minutes and out of her face. She was wiped out. The business with the lump had just pushed her over the edge into total exhaustion. Who wouldn't feel exhausted after having a face-off with the Grim Reaper, right? The ibuprofen had worn off. Her whole left side pulsed along with her heartbeat, and the heat radiating off old Lumpy could toast a marshmallow. She sat up, taking care not to jostle old Lumpy any more than was critically necessary. No doubt about it, this was an infection. She made her way to the bathroom to pee, noting that the swelling had doubled, maybe tripled, since her last examination. She needed to call Kathy and have her call in a prescription for antibiotics before this went any further. The damn lump had its own heartbeat now, for God's sake. If that wasn't an infection, she didn't know what was. She stopped to slurp down the rest of the watery Diet Coke. God, she was thirsty. She imagined she could drink 3 more Diet Cokes back to back and still go back for 1 more. Probably from that dose of Xanax in the morning. So dehydrating, and all she'd had today was the Diet Coke. No wonder her head was pounding. The TV screen asked judgmentally, Jenny thought, "Are you still watching?" In truth, she felt too miserable to watch. She finally found her phone wedged deep between the seat cushions. Too exhausted from the effort to haul herself back up, she sat on the floor with her back up against the front of the sofa, legs splayed out in front of her, and nightshirt unpleasantly damp. She pushed the wake up button on the side of the phone, but the screen only flashed the image of a red battery for a second before dying all the way. She sighed. Of course. At school, she kept her phone plugged in all day over on the countertop by the dry erase board, an example of self-control. If I can see the phone, but you don't have to look at it, see? For the kids. Without that continuous charge, her battery tended to die pretty fast these days. She'd forgotten about that. Andy had set up a charging station on the little table next to the sofa so she could plug it in easily enough. 15 minutes and she'd be ready to call Kathy and get the antibiotics. Andy could pick them up on his way home along with a 2-liter of Diet Coke. It took a feat of will, but she crawled over to the little table and plugged in the phone before slumping back against the front of the couch. She popped the lid off the McDonald's cup and tilted it back to get the last few drops from it. Paul and Ringo crouched together in the far corner of the room, which was odd. On the increasingly rare occasions when she or Andy made their way down to the floor, they normally went nuts, yipping and rushing to bring over toys for the unexpected playtime. But today they just sat there, staring at her. She craned her neck to look into the kitchen. Food and water bowls were full, so they weren't mad about that. She felt like hot garbage, and it was a relief that they weren't all over her, but a bit of loving canine concern would have been appreciated. Something that said, "We're man's best friend. Come here, boys. Come on. Come see Mama." Nothing moved, but their ears, which popped up alertly. From Ringo, what sounded like a growl. 4:43. She woke up groggy when Andy's text came through. "Sorry, working late. Can bring home dinner if you want. Prob close to 8. XOXO." Her side was on fire. Pulsing, licking fire. It took some effort, but she lowered her chin to her chest and turned it slightly to the left so she could look down at her side. Her first thought was, "Wow, look how perky my boobs look!" Her second thought was the realization that they were only pushed back north because of the massive, feverish mound that now encompassed not only her left side, but the front of her abdomen right up to the midline. Jenny pressed the redial for Kathy's office. An automated message reminded her that the office closed at 4 p.m. If this were a medical emergency, she should hang up and call 911 and have a nice day. She considered. Was this a medical emergency? The cyst was pretty huge, but she was breathing and moving around more or less. What was the cost of an ambulance ride these days with her craptastic school district insurance? Jenny decided this was more of an urgent care scenario than a 911 scenario. She'd drive over to that little clinic next door to the grocery store, get them to drain this thing, and get the antibiotics. It'd all be handled before Andy even got home. She'd tell him about it later. He probably couldn't get a signal in that Faraday cage of an office building right now anyway. Old Lumpy rimpled beneath her hand as she pressed over the bulk of it. It was too big now for her hand to cover the whole thing. The heartbeat of pain gave a thud-thud-thud that seemed more than a little elevated. Paul and Ringo had retreated to their kennels in the kitchen, and she was glad Andy had been so insistent that they crate train the dogs. They didn't usually use them during the day. The dogs only put themselves to bed when something distressing happened or 9 p.m. rolled around. She didn't know and didn't care what had sent them there today. They were out of her way as she crawled from the living room into the kitchen. Old Lumpy complained the entire time, and she found she needed to take a breather on the floor by the sink. She was still so thirsty, but the tap and spigot were above her, and there was no way she'd be able to pull herself up to get a drink. She wasn't sure she'd trade $1 million for a drink of water, but 100 wouldn't be too much of a stretch. Ringo whined from his kennel. The pain in her side was definitely ticking up. She hated the thought of calling 911, but she wasn't sure she ought to be driving, given the searing, brain-shattering, vision-blackening agony. Old Lumpy's rippling had become full-on undulating now, and she'd begun to feel some serious concern about the direction the afternoon was heading. Jenny reached down for the phone in her pocket, then remembered that the nightshirt had no pockets. The iPhone was back in the living room, on the charger. That was a fine plot twist. Jenny decided the best thing to do was lie down on the cold tiles for a minute or two before making the trek back. She'd call 911 in a minute.